Hey, church, if I was arrested for murdering someone, how long do you think I would survive as your pastor? Or you found out that I was skimming off the top of the weekly offering, or set up a little shrine to Shiva or Ganesha in my office and reverently burned incense on it every morning. I wouldn't last too long, right? But what if you saw my car parked here at the church first thing every morning, and the light on in my office late every night? Some of you would likely admire me for my work ethic. You know, in many churches, rather than a cause for dismissal, it would be reasoning for a raise. Now, why is it? Why is it that breaking many of the Ten Commandments would lead to an immediate dismissal, while failing to abide by the fourth, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, is often worn as a badge of honor? And how often do we pride ourselves on our busyness? Like many young adults, when I was early in my ministry career, I worked several part-time jobs. One, a part-time student ministry leader. The second, an assistant manager in our school library. I can recall pridefully telling some family members that I hadn't taken a day off in multiple weeks. I was a church leader. I didn't realize that not only was that stupid, it was sinful, at least according to the commandments. I can feel you bristling already, and I'm not shocked. So many of us evangelicals have a negative view of the Sabbath. Now, perhaps it's all the conflicts that Jesus got in with the Pharisees when, according to their reading of the law, what they saw Jesus doing was breaking the Sabbath. Or maybe it's Jesus' words in Mark 2. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It's tied to a misunderstanding that keeping the Sabbath is an exercise of works righteousness. But to me, that doesn't seem to line up with Jesus' words. Jesus suggests that God made Sabbath for man. I don't know about you, but it's been my experience that God's gifts are generally good. So if God's got something for me, it's going to be a good thing. It's something I want, even if it means observing the Sabbath. From Paphos, Paul and his companions sailed to Perga in Pamphylia, where John left them to return to Jerusalem. From Perga, they went to Pisidian Antioch. On the Sabbath, they entered the synagogue and sat down. And next week, we'll look more into what happens in the synagogue. But for the time being, I want to be content simply to observe Paul's practice. On the Sabbath, Paul and Barnabas went to the synagogue and sat down. I think we have a tendency to read Paul and Jesus' purpose, for that matter, through the conflict or, on occasion, the conversions that ensue. That is, we have a tendency to read Paul and Jesus' practice of Sabbath observance as purely pragmatic. They're observing the Sabbath in the synagogue because they're hoping it will provide context in which to share the gospel, rather than view the Sabbath as a sustaining spiritual rhythm vital to their relationship with God in its own right. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul says, surely you remember, brothers and sisters, our toil and hardship. We worked night and day in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preach the gospel of God to you. Now, Paul worked his tail off, but it seems that he also observed the Sabbath. I'm arguing that based on the assumption that Paul was called a lot of things and had conflicts with the church in Jerusalem for a lot of things. But failure to keep the Sabbath was not one of them. Our 24/7 culture has almost entirely abandoned the concept of Sabbath, and the results are telling. One of my professors suggested that the result of our Sabbath amnesia is that we've become perhaps the most emotionally exhausted, psychologically overworked, spiritually malnourished people in history. And not just because we're omitting a particular day, but because we have ceased to live in rhythm with the way God created everything. Now, this isn't the place for specifics, but I do want to invite you to consider this fuller. Do you have a day of rest? The Sabbath isn't about works, it's about delighting in God. Marva Dawn suggested the core components of Sabbath are ceasing, resting, embracing, and feasting, and through which we reorient ourselves. And remember that the world doesn't rest on our shoulders, but God's. And as an act of trust for one 24-hour period, we stop our work. We rest on ourselves on his shoulders as well.